right, folks, welcome to another webinar from the Boulder Chamber and our partners at the Supply Chain Collective. I'm Matt Wiggins, Associate Vice President of Economic Vitality here at the Boulder Chamber. And joining us today is Courtney Stiers with Kroll Consulting. She's the Vice President there at Kroll Consulting. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about foreign trade zones, maybe some bond warehousing and some things like that. Eric Edwards, who's also with the Supply Chain Collective, is not currently on the call, but may be joining us momentarily. Just to kind of recap, we've been conducting these webinars over the course of 2 months in response to some of the news coming out of the administration with tariffs and all the other strategies that go along with the tariffs that have been going on globally. During the course of the webinar, we'll be sharing some resources that you can access. And then once we are finished with this webinar today, we are going to be posting this to our YouTube channel. I'll also drop in that playlist, the link to the playlist, so you can see those different videos. That way you can kind of engage with them and ask questions. And again, more resources will be shared on that playlist. But to get us kicked off, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney. Courtney, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. First and foremost, I want to apologize. I am getting over a summer cold, unfortunately. So hopefully I sound okay throughout that, but I may make pauses to grab a sip of water every now and then. So as Matt was mentioning, today we are going to be talking about unlocking FTZ strategies, and we're doing so in a manner that FTZs is not really a one size fits all. And we're also going to look at some bonded warehouses and everything that goes along with that, including advantages and disadvantages. So I'm going to start. I'll give you a quick introduction of myself, but hopefully Eric will also jump on and he can do proper introductions for him as well. So again, I'm Courtney Stiers. I'm a VP here at Kroll. I have over 10 years of FTZ specific experience. I've kind of done everything on the spectrum from grantee to administration to just general in-house consulting as well. Currently managing FTZs, but also very heavy unbonded warehouses, as I'm sure you all are interested in too. And then continually keeping up in the ever-changing tariff environment. So Eric, hopefully I introduced myself long enough to let you catch your breath. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and give a little bit more overview of the Supply Chain Collective? You're on mute.
Oh, there we go. Eric Edwards, apologize for being a little bit late. It's been one of those days right now. I am one of the members for the Supply Chain Collective. We are a proud exclusive partner with the Boulder Chamber of Commerce as far as supply chain supporting services. We've been doing a lot of different webinars like this one with them, talking with other members as far as helping them on import, export, and anything from sourcing, you name it, in that space. Long time in the import-export realm myself, so 25 plus years in a variety of different industries, licensed customs broker. Been working with a lot of different companies, as Courtney just said, specifically on tariffs, seems to be the hot topic for some reason right now. But a lot of tariff work with people, classification, and then talking foreign trade zones is one of the best options as well. I know we also will be touching on a little bit of the bonded warehousing in a bit. We do work with Kroll, very happy to have worked with them in the past, and very excited to be doing this webinar with Courtney, because I think between the two of us, I would love to hear some of the QA, because I think the two of us have got pretty good complementary background across the realm of things. So see if somebody can stump us in the questions. And then,
so, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, sorry. I guess with that, this is just kind of an ongoing series that we've been doing with the Boulder Chamber. Very specifically, we did want to do foreign trade zones. It's one of the things that, yes, it's being called out very specifically in the tariffs itself on how they want to handle foreign trade zones, but it still remains a very good tool for businesses if you're looking in a way to actually manage and mitigate the tariffs themselves. We have a little bit on the agenda for where we'll be going through on it today, a little bit of key terminology, like we said earlier, bonded warehouse, foreign trade zone, and then little bit of the background. We'll spend a little bit just so everyone understands how foreign trade zones came around, and then really dive into the meat of everything on the benefits, and leave a fair amount of time, I think, for QA for everyone at the end. And then I think on this one, it's as we're going through things, I know Courtney and I were definitely trade nerds, but for a lot of people, if you're not a trade nerd, I used this in the past. I think people, if you've been on some of the other webinars, you are familiar with the slide already. But to just try to put some of the different terms out there so people understand when we're talking about what's a customs duty, what's customs tariff, what's the difference. And then also, frankly, when we're talking about all these tariffs, what's a 301 tariff? What does IEPA mean? You know, this way we don't really need a deep dive on it, but also it just makes for a nice handy cheat sheet for people when this gets sent out afterwards.
Yes, I always joke that talking and customs and trade is pretty much talking in code between the different numbers, acronyms, and the random words we assign to those acronyms on top of it. So definitely helpful to keep in reference back to.
And then just to kind of help set the table a little bit. So did add in a couple other slides here as far as what all the tariffs are. This is a little bit of a step flow process that I used last week and just added it in here for people that was like, let's set the table on what are all the tariffs that we're talking about. Traditionally, foreign trade zones have only been dealing with the customs duty, which on average is about 3% traditionally, I want to say. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong there, Courtney, but I think it's always right around 3 to 5.
Yeah, it's usually what it is.
Yeah, and based on that, we're like, oh, 3 to 5. Now we have all the tariffs, so it's big, but just added this in. It makes for a nice little process flow of if this, then that, for all the tariffs, what applies, what doesn't apply. But this way you can kind of figure out what are we talking about for the total duty rate in tariff amount that is going to be applicable to your products. And then down at the end, I just kind of added in there, you get through all of this, you get your base tariffs, and then if you have China origin, you need to add that other 25 and 20% on top of whatever it is that you came up on the top. But just a little easy cheat sheet for people. And then if you don't mind, let's talk, we have the bingo card, as I like to refer to it at this point in time. By the time we go through that last sheet, you kind of figure out what tariffs you do have that are applicable. This one was like, all right, well, now that we have a good idea of what tariffs are applicable, well, what is allowed within each one of those? As they've been rolling out these tariffs, they say what you can and you can't do as far as customs activity. So this is just, again, it's kind of a bingo card in the way that I like to say is, okay, if we're talking 301 tariffs, well, what can you do? It's roughly 25% on average. You can do drawback. There's really nothing in there for US content, but there are other tools out there as far as what you're allowed to do with FTZ and not allowed to do with an FTZ, and then the impact for de minimis. But it kind of gives a good idea that once you go through the flow chart, you kind of come to this, and it helps set the table more than anything else on what can and can't be done. But it's a good reference sheet.
I think this table too is also really helpful for people who are looking at the different FTZ strategies or bond warehouse strategies, or just really any tariff mitigation strategies, seeing what type of tariffs are applicable to your particular business model, and then which program were you considering, and are those applicable to any of your tariffs as well. So I always think that's a good first step in evaluating any type of trade remedy program.
Yeah, and the only other call before we move on to is I did add in here, we got the Venezuelan oil down at the end. This is your random tariff that it was in the news a while back. It's still kind of pending out there, but just so we don't forget about it. So it is there, you know, it's 25%, but they haven't really said anything about it just yet. But this way it still keeps it on your radar that as you're trying to talk with especially your CFO or your senior leadership and everything, you're like, when they ask you what the potential is, this thing's still out there. And then I think Courtney kind of let you talk a little bit more bonded warehouse and FTZ.
Yeah, let's jump right into it. So I think one of the biggest questions today is well, do I need a foreign trade zone or a bonded warehouse? While both of them are considered bonded warehouses in customs eyes and viewpoint, there are a lot of key differences when it comes to implementing and kind of operational processes that can be done within the program. Historically, the FTZ provides a lot more flexibility in terms of business, what you can and can't do inside the facility, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility overall in your operations. Where a bonded warehouse is going to be a little bit more rigid in what you can and cannot do, a lot more customs oversight and overview segregation. With that said, doesn't mean one program is better than the other. It just, we really need to look at the differences between them to identify what is going to be best. One thing I will say is some people are leaning towards bonded warehouses right now just due to the instability of the tariff environment. But long term, it may not be the best option just because of some of the restrictions and limitations overall. So we'll jump into some of those. Okay, here, these are, I would not say this is a full collective list of all the differences between the two types of bonded warehouses or programs. But what I would say, these are probably the most applicable to the widest range of potential users. So in a foreign trade zone, the merchandise is actually considered outside of customs territory. So when you bring something into an FTZ, you're emitting it, but it's never actually hitting the US commerce. And that's really important because you can manage free trade agreements through an FTZ. So if you're transiting something and it needs to stop in the US before it goes, you can still retain those FTA agreements. Unlike a bonded warehouse, where it's actually considered part of the US territory. And the reason for that is that there's a 5-year limitation on how long goods can remain in a bonded warehouse. So once a shipment is brought into a bonded warehouse, you have 5 years to either make entry or re-export it. Where in a foreign trade zone, merchandise can stay in there indefinitely. That means if you want to wait out merchandise, tariff changes, or you need to reevaluate your supply chain strategies, an FTZ is a better long-term strategy in that case. Something that some people do not consider are the customs entry privileges. So again, in a foreign trade zone, since the merchandise is not technically in the US commerce yet and has not been imported, the customs entries are going to be on a weekly entry for the most part. That weekly entry allows you to consolidate everything that was shipped out of your FTZ for the week on one single entry. That saves on merchandise processing fee and broker fees. However, in a bonded warehouse, every shipment that comes in, that entire shipment usually has to go out. And that has to do so on a customs entry if it's going into the US commerce. That means you're not saving on any of the broker fees, merchandise processing fees, and you're still paying for that. A lot of ports don't allow pick and pack out of a bonded warehouse. So that means you are taking that entire shipment that was imported in and having to enter it immediately if you need anything from that shipment. That's where the flexibility of the foreign trade zone comes in a little bit more, where goods can be commingled. So what we mean by that is both domestic and foreign status merchandise can actually be commingled in the same area within a activated foreign trade zone. Bonded warehouses require complete segregation on that. Eric, did you want to add some commentary on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I do want to stress that for what you're talking about too, for what Courtney's saying is, I think a lot of people, when they hear bonded warehouse, they think this is like a general warehouse and I can put it in there. I can do my pick and pack. I can pull, I sent in a whole 40-foot container worth of product. I only need 2 boxes out of that 40-foot container. Well, it doesn't work that way. You actually have to take the full 40-foot container. So you put in a 40-foot container, you have to take out a 40-foot container. And if your boss is asking you, we really need to do bonded warehouses, it sounds good from the tariff perspective, but I think the details of how you have to manage it's a big detail.
Yeah, and you lose all that duty deferral, right? So all that merchandise that you didn't need, so the 1,000 other boxes that are still in that container you don't need access to now, could have still been sitting in the FTZ getting the deferral of duties. And you also lose out on potential export. right? So if you needed to export half of a container, but you are needing some of them, the boxes out of that container now, you lose on that potential ability to export. Obviously, there's other means to claim that back. Those are long-term strategies such as duty drawback. And it kind of mitigates having a program that would allow you to do all of that without having to implement multiple programs.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is bonded warehousing has become very popular to talk about right now, just because as they did the tariffs that we already touched on earlier, you know, this administration called out how the material needs to be handled going into a foreign trade zone. So they want it locked at the rate at the time it goes into the foreign trade zone. And as these rates keep going up and down on our roller coaster, we all kind of, you know, are afraid. You don't want to put it in there when you're at 125% for Chinese goods, and then it goes down to, you know, where are we right now? Roughly 55% all in. Well, now you're trapped at that 125. The difference is on a bonded warehouse, yes, you can pay it when it comes out, but the other thing to keep in mind, they haven't specifically changed how bonded warehouses are supposed to be utilized within the tariffs as they put them out. The one thing to keep in mind, I think, as well, is just because they haven't done it right now doesn't mean they won't do it tomorrow or next week. So if you're moving forward with a bonded warehouse thinking, oh, well, if these things go down, we'll be in a better shape, even though I can still manage, I put in a 40-foot container and take out a 40-foot container, I'll get it at the lower rate. If they change out what those regulations are on the tariffs, you could be in even worse shape than what you thought when you were going in. So just be aware, they can change the rules of the game as they go forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think we saw that with the FTZs. And I fully expect them to get smart about some of the other programs that are out there regarding this. Something else we should probably mention is about manufacturing of goods or just any type of manipulation. In a foreign trade zone, you get blanket approval for a lot of things. So kitting, repackaging, all of that is pretty standard approval as part of the FTZ. However, in a bonded warehouse, if for some reason you had bad packaging and now you need to repackage all that merchandise, you actually have to get shipment-specific approval for every type of manipulation or audit or edit thing that you want to do to those goods. And so sometimes there is a little bit of delay depending on how backed up that port is in providing you with feedback or approvals. So that's also kind of an operational restraint that a bonded warehouse may provide. Another thing is the customs bonds. So an FTZ is covered by one single Type 4 FTZ operator's bond, while in a regular bonded warehouse, you actually have to have an individual bond for every shipment that is admitted into that bonded warehouse. It's something that not a lot of companies realize or think about, and it does add some additional costs to operating that bonded warehouse, as well as time to make sure it's approved and secured. A lot of additional paperwork that's not really so automatic as it would be in an FTZ. So at a high level, those are really some key things. I think the last thing I would mention in the differences is the movement of merchandise. So in a foreign trade zone, you can actually move goods to other FTZs, so zone transfers. You can export it, you can destroy it, and you can even transfer it to another bonded warehouse. However, in a bonded warehouse, you can only enter it in for consumption or exported. If you need to do any type of destruction, you would need special privileges to do so. And then if for some reason you did need to transfer to a foreign trade zone, there's a lot of restrictions on it, such as it has to go in under zone restricted status, meaning that FTZ can now only export or destroy the merchandise, and they have to do so within that 5-year time limit from when it was originally admitted into the bonded warehouse. Oh,
Take a quick pause if there's any questions, comments, concerns. Is your boss pressuring you to do a bonded warehouse and you've got questions on, is it right for you? If not, definitely, I think Matt put it out there too. Just drop some stuff in the QA too. Happy to answer any questions there to help you out.
yeah, and One thing I would say too, Eric and I are both very familiar with doing this, is you can quantify the differences between a foreign trade zone and a bonded warehouse, either in today's current environment as well as future state environment. So there is ways to quantify the benefits of both to see which one really is going to be better for the company in the long term, right? You don't want to make a decision based on today's tariff environment when it might change in 3 tweets.
Correct. And I think that's probably a good segue too, as we kind of get into the background a little bit on the FTZ program. Bonded warehousing is really meant for in transit more than anything else. It's not really meant to do anything beyond just hold it outside while it's in transit for customs to have to do something with it. It's a good segue, I think, into the history on a foreign trade zone of why an FTZ has got a little bit more flexibility to it.
So we'll jump into the background. So what is a foreign trade zone? A foreign trade zone is an area of land that's physically in the United States, but it's considered outside of U.S. customs territory. I know I mentioned that earlier in the bonded warehouse comparison slide. But what that really means is that merchandise that is entered into the FTZ has never touched U.S. customs. They have visibility of it due to the paperwork of the emissions, but technically there's no expectation of duty payment on those at that time. A lot of countries have some type of foreign trade zone program. The United States calls it specifically a foreign trade zone, while other countries may refer to it as free trade zones, free ports, inward processing, bonded warehouses, economic zones, etc. They're not new. They've been around since the 1930s. We've definitely seen an increase. I would say even the past 10 years, we've seen an exponential increase in the FTZ program. I would say more strategically, I have been seeing companies implement foreign trade zones here in the United States while also doing other types of free trade zones around the world. So foreign trade zones are usually part of a larger supply chain strategy, whether you have a manufacturer who's trying to get their suppliers to be FTZs, or if you're trying to save on duties because a lot of your components are going to actually be exported or sent to international waters. There's a lot of unique benefits that the foreign trade zone program can provide. So again, 1934 was when it officially received congressional authority. When we say there's 303 FTZs across the United States, those are the grantees that are overseeing the program. So there are 303 zones around the country. However, within each one of those zones, there can be upwards of a few hundred to one or two companies that are operating at FTZ within there. So we have, I think the last time I looked at the annual report, 3,000 or close to 3,000 companies or individual FTZ sites across the country. So the program's not new. There are people using it. They're strategically using it, but not everyone is as familiar with it as they should be.
Yeah.
But
I was gonna say, I think for that one in this region too, it's maybe not as well understood in this region from a marketing perspective. There's only a handful in the Denver metro area. We have 7 to 8 really in this area. But there has been a lot of interest. I know over the last year or two, even before things took off this year, there's a lot of interest of how to expand and utilize this. And that's been branching everywhere from up in Bozeman, Casper, Cheyenne, down to Denver. And as Courtney mentioned, you think about it, you can bring stuff in and you can move stuff FTZ to FTZ as far as your supply chain is concerned as well. So it does, what I would say for some people too is think about it, while maybe you don't necessarily need it right now at your facility, you might want to be able to utilize it in some capacity within your supply chain as you're bringing your goods into what you need to use. So whether you actually utilize an FTZ, say at LA or Houston at one of the first ports of call, you can also bring it up and use it somewhere in the Denver metro area, Kansas City, somewhere where it's coming in route in your bulk goods. And I'm just thinking of how, like, say, the UP or the BN might be bringing it in. You can store it inland, hold it there, and still get some of the benefits that we'll be talking about in a little bit prior to actually bringing it out, bringing it to your facility, whether your facility is a foreign trade zone or not.
yeah, and I think there's a lot of unique strategies in the world of FTZs, right? You can have the mom and pop shops with only 1 or 2 employees utilizing an FTZ, all the way up to a Fortune 50 company with a massive global presence. Like I said, the FTZs kind of one size fits all in the sense that it's one program, but how you are using the program, how you're obtaining some of the benefits of that program will be unique to every single company. So yeah, this is just a little bit more on, there's over 3,400 companies, and I'm sure that has increased since the last time we reviewed this slide. But I think it's really important to highlight the fact that there are so many industries that utilize FTZs. One thing I always like to tell people is that if you walked around your house and you looked at your different household items, you could probably guarantee at least 40%, if not 50% of that, the material in your home or items have probably come from some FTZ in the United States. I say that because most of our household items are usually imported or imported from imported components. So common industries that we see right now: pharmaceuticals, oil and petroleum, cars, vehicles, consumer products, as well as machinery and equipment. But I would say we're even growing into more fields, right? I think more consumer merchandise is also in here. Household furniture. I mean, really, there hasn't been an industry yet that I've like, yep, that's definitely not going to be a fit for FTZs to this point. So we're going to jump into some of the benefits of the FTZ program specifically. First, we always like to talk about how does a company benefit? Who's going to even benefit from an FTZ? And a lot of people don't want to do the due diligence of really breaking down the data of it. So I like to give high level concepts where you can consider, yes, it's probably worth you digging a little bit deeper. So the first one is, do you pay a significant amount of tariffs or merchandise processing fee or have any type of inventory tax? If those are possible options, then you may want to look into an FTZ. I've actually implemented an FTZ where the only benefit that they needed, or where they had over $300,000 in savings every year, was for the merchandise processing fee consolidation. So they were paying so much merchandise processing fee by implementing a FTZ, they automatically saved $300,000 a year without any additional benefits, which is crazy.
It's funny, that item alone, there's a lot of people that sign up for it just to do it.
Yeah, it's so easy. And you save on broker fees because you're not paying a broker for every one of those entries. You're just once a week. It's crazy how the benefits add up. Any type of company who's doing high volume import or export transactions, obviously they would be a good candidate to look into the FTZ program. Any company who's really looking to leverage the US as their key operational, so basically they're looking to diversify their supply chain, and they really want to use the US as kind of their hub. A lot with this one in particular, I like to think about companies who do a lot of spare parts, right? If you have a bunch of manufacturing facilities or warehouses or areas where you need to send spare parts to, an FTZ could be beneficial because you can hold those parts until they're needed. And that really saves on cash flow. And then again, any company who's really looking to increase their supply chain efficiencies, whether that's through export or trade lanes or direct delivery, which we'll get into in a minute. Okay. You look like you wanted to say something. I was going to give you the opportunity before I keep gabbing away.
No, I was going to say, I think this is probably the good slide in, we can talk through a lot of the different varieties of what this might look like. So as much as the last slide, I chuckle whenever we say it's companies who pay a significant amount of duty and tariffs, which I think at this point in time, if you're importing in the US, you should just be looking in a mirror. That's probably everyone that's importing right now. So it's a great program. And then I think the slide does a very good job of opening that up. And Courtney, I can probably riff on a couple different, I think, areas that we can think of how this can work, right? I know last week, duty deferral was the one that I mentioned out to a lot of people that, like Courtney mentioned, merchandise processing fee, there's great savings in that for a lot of companies. When you look at that, just between the fee itself that gets paid to customs, as far as your customs entry fees as well and what that reduces. But this duty deferral, even last week, I was speaking with some of the different banking people that we had at one of the events. There are different programs with customs that you can actually, one, pay your customs duty essentially on, you get terms. So you can pay it next month. So whatever happens this month, you pay it next month. With the FTZ right now on this duty deferral, if you think about it, you do this on a weekly basis, you import everything in, you do a customs entry on one day out of the week. And say you do it on Monday. That means everything from Tuesday through Sunday is going to get declared on Monday. So all of your activity in your FTZ that starts Tuesday through Friday, and if you work on a weekend, you do all of that on a weekly entry. But if you're shipping that out to a customer, and it doesn't even have to be direct to a consumer, but to your customer, and if you bill your customer on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you're billing your customer before you actually have to pay customs duty and customs tariff at that point in time. So when you're billing in advance of actually doing the cash outlay, that alone is a big deal. And if you're on that other program with customs and you're billing before you actually have to pay it, but now you incurred a cost, but you don't actually have to pay that money until the following month, conceivably you might have an option that you can be collecting money from your customers before you actually have to pay it out. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things for people to kind of think through is that from a cash flow perspective, it's huge. Time cost of money is a big deal anymore.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think that rolls down into the point right below that, right? Savings from re-export. To that point, you could be charging your customers, but you're sending that export, so you're actually having that benefit of never having to pay the U.S. tariffs, right? You would just be responsible for the tariffs in the other country, which, of course, are always ever changing as well. But the FTZ being able to just never pay the duties for those that are being exported is very beneficial. I know a lot of companies have implemented, or they come back and say, oh, well, we have duty drawback. And well, duty drawback is great, but you are only retaining a percentage of that, as well as whatever your broker, whoever's filing on your behalf, is also not taking a percentage of, right? The FTZ program allows you to keep all of the fees altogether without having to worry about drawback, keeping all of that record keeping, and making sure that it's accurate for those filings.
Yeah, and the way I like to say it for duty drawback is duty drawback implies you had to pay it to ask to get your money back. Foreign trade zone means you don't have to pay it. You just go past go and collect your money. It's why pay it out and ask for it. So I think that's another benefit on this. If you're doing a lot of export to that point, it's one less program to worry about.
Merchandise processing fee, I think we hit this one enough, but that is typically a major savings for a lot of companies, even with U.S. Customs increasing the minimum and maximum of the MPF payments every year. People are still seeing a significant savings from that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, we keep bumping off, but I was thinking actually, and I was actually thinking on the inverted tariff as we move into that too, for all these other, the other bullets that we've kind of talked about. So the inverted tariff, as we said, roughly your average is 3 to 5% on that. And there's a lot of companies that maybe you took a look at a foreign trade zone even last year, and you're like, there's probably not enough money in there at that point in time. I would go take that, blow the dust off of it, and look at it again, because you have duty and you have tariff. This is just the inverted duty to 3 to 5%. And while we still have that tariff impact that's out there, if you look at those other three bullets that we already talked about between deferral, re-export, and MPF, all of those now, they kind of reconfigure what that math looked like even a year ago. And I'm like, okay, this is a nice added benefit. When you're talking 25 to 50% tariff, inverted duty is maybe not as big a deal, but it's a big deal for a lot of companies. And then all this other stuff changes out your math from a cash flow perspective. It might be worth looking at that again and revisiting it. And if your leadership said, $1 million in savings, I'm a big enough company, $1 million isn't a big deal. You're like, yeah, it's $1 million in savings plus all of these other added benefits now.
Yeah, and one thing I would also mention about savings from inverted tariff. While there are some restrictions with some of the tariffs and special tariffs that are out now, what a lot of companies aren't considering is the fact that that finished good or the finished component that's going, especially if you're exporting, it is going into another country, is often still a lower tariff value than some of the individual components in that. And so I think that's also an important consideration. Maybe if you're not getting the full inverted tariff here in the United States, but you're still exporting some of that merchandise, there is still potential savings within that that aspect. I think we have a question. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I see we have a question came in. Can duty drawback programs and FTZ be combined?
I can take this. I would say once you have a foreign trade zone, your need for a duty drawback really goes away for the most part. What a lot of companies will do is while they're implementing a foreign trade zone, it's not necessarily a quick process all the time, is that they'll supplement duty drawback while they're implementing that foreign trade zone, and then while they're depleting some of that domestic inventory that they have within their company. And so it's kind of an intermediate strategy while they're working their way towards the full FTZ implementation. Eric, I don't know if you have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think the only thing to say, expanding on it, is drawback can go back 5 years. So if you're going to do drawback as an intermediate kind of step, you can always go claw back extra money from a couple years prior while you're doing it. You implement that, and then as soon as your FTZ comes in, it's kind of like you taper down your activity on drawback, because at that point, you're not paying the money out up front. And like we said, it becomes a little bit more cash flow friendly at that point going through the FTZ.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to put it. I've also seen some companies who have already been using drawback. They justify the use of drawback to pay for the implementation of an FTZ as well. It kind of helps settle everyone's nerves about implementing a foreign trade zone. Another benefit on here is improved processes, which is a benefit that I feel like a lot of companies don't necessarily think about. But as part of a FTZ implementation, you're really going to take a deep dive in your record keeping, how your inventory controls are, what your warehouse or your facilities are doing, how you're accounting for merchandise. And you need to make sure that it's all compliant. And so what a lot of companies find is that their inventory counts increase in accuracy. They have stronger controls, stronger visibility. A lot of FTZ programs will actually let you print duty savings, duty reports, as well as like everything you've saved for the year. And so there's a lot more visibility into the total duties paying, where the merchandise is coming from, country of origin, where your tariffs are really being hit. So I think that's a benefit that it's not really financially beneficial, but it definitely helps operationally across the board for the implementation.
Yeah, I would definitely stress from an efficiency perspective, it is kind of a subtle item that tends to improve for companies. And if you think of a foreign trade zone in the sense that it is a inventory control system on steroids. And who doesn't want better inventory control? So it does kind of help tighten that up from a mindset perspective. And there's always different things that you have to keep in mind as you go to implement a foreign trade zone around that inventory on who's coming and grabbing parts and everything else. It is actually a means to an end too. If you need to have a little bit more leverage over some of these other groups, sales, engineering, that just keep grabbing samples, it does drive more controls around it. It doesn't mean that they can't do it. It just means you're going to have better controls around your inventory on where it goes.
Exactly. The last benefit on this particular slide we want to talk about are the free trade agreements. I did briefly explain this and the differences between the bond and warehouse. But if you have free trade agreements with two countries that are outside the United States, say the UK and Mexico, for example, you could move the goods through an FTZ, because they're always considered in transit. And then move right into Mexico, retaining that original free trade agreement. Because again, the foreign trade zone is considered outside of the US commerce. Okay, a few more benefits here to go through. So production equipment is used for companies who are maybe building their facility. You can actually bring in the materials that are used specifically within the production line. So think like whatever is going to be used to manufacture, not the giant trucks or those assets. More so, whatever merchandise is used as part of the actual production of it, your commodity. You can bring that into your active FTZ, and then once you have tested, implemented, then you would pay a entry or a consumption entry on all those components that you've entered. So it helps with some of the duty deferment of a company that's getting started or implementing an FTZ in a manufacturing environment. Direct delivery. So FTZs can help speed up supply chain because you can be approved for direct delivery. Not everyone qualifies. You do have to be the owner or have financial stake within the imported merchandise. But what direct delivery does is it lets you move directly from the port to your facility. So you don't have to go into the line, the whole container line where everyone's getting inspected and reviewed. You kind of get put on a 7512 or an inbound movement and sent directly to your facility. If CBP for some reason did want to inspect your merchandise, they could do so at your facility again. Most of the time, they are not going to want to drive all the way there. So it's great help. Zone to zone transfers. You can move merchandise from one FTZ to another, retaining that foreign status, meaning that duties are never paid until it's released from that other FTZ. This is important in companies that have multiple warehouses across the board. If you have multiple distribution centers and you want to flux inventory back and forth, or if you are a raw material provider, supplier, and you're sending it to a manufacturer who may have an FTZ, you can get into an agreement where you ship it in foreign status and help save the duties across the board. There's a lot of visibility that's involved with it, but there's also a lot of strategic commercial terms that can be implemented in it. Entry eligibility. This one is kind of interesting for me. I'm always into the weird pharmaceutical stuff, but for example, if something is not FDA approved, so say you're waiting on FDA approval, it's still going through clinical trials, you can actually import it into a foreign trade zone. You can hold it until you get that approval. You can bring it into the FTZ for research and testing. And it's not just FDA too, right? It's EPA. So like if you have a car that's not certified for the United States, you can bring it into a secured FTZ, do research and study on it as well, without those approvals.
Yeah, and this one, having done med device just recently as well, it's more, you're doing your manufacturing in the US, you're making products for a global audience. Not all of these products, as Courtney mentioned, like cars, med device, pharma, it may not all be meant for the US market, and it's not approved for the US market. And you don't want to bother getting it approved for the US market. This is how you actually bring it through. You can still manage and handle it within the US because you are physically within the US, but it's outside US commerce. And that flexibility within the foreign trade zone means you can do a lot of different things with it and keep it outside of US commerce. And you bring it in, you're going to ship it out. And this is also one of those items where typically you would think drawback, because if you had to bring stuff in to make it in the US, it's not going to stay in the US for sales, it's going to go back out. It's a good way to manage it, manage your cash flow, and still be able to handle it very much like you would any other product that you have there.
There are also companies who use the US kind of their centralization point. So they'll bring in goods that are maybe spec'd out for a different country. And so they need to come into the FTZ and be manipulated to hit FDA or hit US terms, whether that's EPA, FDA compliance too. So an FTZ actually allows you to bring merchandise into US compliance without additional approvals per shipment.
Or combine your shipments too. It's depending on where else coming from to that point. You could have stuff down on the southern border coming from a maquila and come into the US, and then you have other stuff coming in from outside the US, comes to your distribution point within the US. You combine all those bits and pieces together, and then you ship it back out, direct to consumer, direct to business, whatever on it. And as we said, you can do that in a foreign trade zone. You cannot do that in a bonded warehouse unless you're going to take that entire manifested shipment to ship it out. So good flexibility.
On the slide here, the last one, just briefly talk about is inventory tax. While it's not necessarily relevant in the Denver specific area or not the whole area up there, Texas, Kentucky, and Arizona are the key states that have this special tangible personal property tax. The reason we've always put it in our slides as a collectively is if you're doing a larger strategy, right? A lot of companies have more than one facility. So if you do have one of the facilities in there, that's definitely a taxing consideration you should keep in mind.
Yeah, and on that one too, having done a variety of FTZs in Texas, it's a huge deal, one on the tax, but I will also say if anyone in your company is looking at doing this in Texas, it doesn't necessarily mean you get to go to zero as far as this tax is concerned. When you go to get approval for the foreign trade zone, your constituents are going to be able to say whether they should approve or not approve of your foreign trade zone. So you probably do need to come up with a plan. This means that that area is going to be out some of the tax revenue. So you need to come up with a plan on how you want to manage to get this through for approval within that area. There's a variety of different, ideas and strategies that you can do around that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you get to go to zero. You may still need to make some sort of donation annually, if you want to call it that, in order to get your site approved, but still be a good neighbor in that area.
I think that's a very important part.
And then we kind of put a little bit of a slide here to think through kind of what it looks like visually. I think Courtney and I, we both go around and around on this stuff. It's hard to give a static slide that kind of shows the difference of how the goods kind of flow through from outside into the US. But this is just kind of a walkthrough for if you're talking to people that how the goods kind of depart from overseas, they come into the US, they go into the FTZ, they ship out of the FTZ, and then they go on a weekly entry. But kind of how that kind of looks like as you go through a step flow process, stuff kind of getting a little bit of a graphic. But on that third step, just again, very much a call out as far as your strategies on cash flow, because that material coming and going out of the FTZ right there, I think from a cash flow perspective for companies, the more you can talk about that with your leadership and the impacts there, it's not just tariff, but you can't get out of the tariff, but if you can manage how you pay the tariff, the how is a bigger deal than the amount sometimes.
Yeah, I think the how and the when, very important.
Yeah, and then as we kind of talk through some of this, I was trying to think on slides, there's a variety of different ways of doing this too. So like we kind of talked about, you can bring the stuff into the US, and you might want to keep it at foreign trade zone on its way into your facility within the US. The other one to think about too is you could just utilize a third party, a 3PL foreign trade zone. I think both Courtney and I have had experience doing that as well. So as you get into some of these examples, you can bring that in. It goes into a 3PL FTZ for just a distribution center per se. So in this case, pet toys. Maybe you don't manage that yourself at your own facility. It's through a 3PL. Well, if they're doing it as an FTZ, you can get a lot of savings out of it by utilizing them. It doesn't mean that you as a company need to go get approved to do the FTZ yourself. You can lean on your 3PL that one, maybe they do it on your behalf, but if they do it, they might be doing it for a variety of other companies and kind of bring that cost down in the aggregate because they can defer and spread those costs out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think there are other considerations too in the world of 3PL. For example, we had a client who had a product line that was specifically coming into the United States and always being exported. However, the rest of their merchandise was a heavy domestic or duty-free, so it was just coming in and going into the US commerce. So what they did was they took that specific product line and put it into a 3PL run distribution center. So any sales or shipments would go from that specific 3PL. So in that case, they didn't need a full FTZ, but they realized almost 100% savings because they were running that through an FTZ, no longer 3PL FTZ, no longer paying those duties on it.
Yeah, and again, when we go back to some of those benefits we talked about, I think it's a good one to think of too is, hey, maybe it is all going to be within the US, but if you can do some consolidation, as far as, oh, I'm going to consolidate all of my entries and I go from, 1,000 entries a year down to 200 entries a year, there's a big savings just on that, the merchandise processing fees. And then again, you think of that cash flow perspective that you might be able to benefit from as well. You just have to look at kind of what this looks like within your business and what those benefits might be, and just kind of take a look at the variety of buckets that are there.
I think we just included some of these examples. Yeah, we just want to include examples of different types of components that could come in for your future reference in that.
Yeah. And then I think as we kind of do this kind of a benefits overall, kind of wrapping up a little bit of the slides here, the other item I think to think of as well, and I don't know if we've talked about it yet, Courtney, is FTZ business parks.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a variety of interest in this area as well, that when you look at all of these benefits on the slide here between facilitation for trade, your local economic development efforts, or even regional economic development efforts. A lot of these different states, I know they're trying to figure out how to work together as far as stitching together an overall footprint to help businesses in this region continue to grow and manage costs.
One thing I have seen here recently are economic development groups working with industrial park developers to pre-designate that entire industrial park as an FTZ. And what that does is essentially it reduces the barrier to entry for FTZ operators. So the industrial park developers get a benefit, the economic get a benefit because you have more companies coming. But what it does is allows you to simply just activate. You no longer have to go through that geographic application as part of the process, which can also create what we call cluster effect, right? So if there is a company who is manufacturing locally, they may encourage their suppliers to become FTZs and set up locally to help with the distance from their supply chain and really build out those efficiencies. So we call that a cluster effect when you have a company that is developing a whole cluster of FTZs, which overall ends up helping that local economic development.
Yeah, and I think the one thing we didn't talk about as much too is kind of the process when you go through for activation is you kind of want to evaluate, okay, what are your potential savings? You go through an approval process with the FTZ board. So you ask to get approval. And that's kind of what we touched on before too, even on the local taxes, say in Texas. So you need to go through for the approval. Everyone signs up and says, yes, we do think you're a good candidate for an FTZ. We do sign off and say that you should be able to do it. Then you go into the next stage of activation. So if you're a business park, you don't really have to worry about going through all that approval process. It's just that much faster. You don't have that lag. If you're going to do it yourself, you can also go through, do the approval process, and then wait. You don't necessarily have to activate. So if you think of it like that business park, you've gotten the approval, but you don't have to activate anything either for some time. Once you activate, that's when you need to have a little bit more of a business plan around both the security and then FTZ management software. But you can kind of think through as you go through these phases, how does that work best for you? Or if you're a business park and you're trying to find added benefits for different clients coming into your business park, again, if you've already gone through approval, your customers, they can just take advantage of actually doing the activation themselves. Or you have a 3PL warehouse in your business park, and then it's a 3PL warehouse that actually goes and does the activation, and then they're doing it on behalf of multiple clients.
With that, I think, Eric, I think there was a question.
Did you get another one?
I think so. However, I'm sharing my screen in a weird way. So.
I didn't see another question.
Yeah, it says, can FTZs coexist with enterprise zones?
Oh, do you want to take that one?
I'm have to say this one would stump me. Is enterprise zone specific to the what type of enterprise zone are we talking about here?
So I'll
Do
just say this was my question, Courtney. Enterprise zones typically like a chip zone. So if a municipality is trying to develop a chip zone to bring in semiconductor companies and things like that, if they have pre-existing enterprise zones in a municipality, would it interfere with any kind of FTZ?
Yeah, I would say no, it would not interfere with that. It would actually be a good strategy long term for that, right? So a lot of those enterprise zones offer some type of economic benefit for those companies to relocate there, but it's within a certain time period, usually 10 years, whatever, however long the grants are, whether it's taxes or any type of support. The FTZ would allow that company who would establish themselves within that enterprise zone to have longer lasting benefits. So lifetime benefits of being at that facility rather than the temporary terms of relocating there. So here, I'm in Indiana. I probably should have let you all know that. We have these similar zones, and a lot of the economic developments have actually partnered with the local grantees for FTZs to combine those two programs. So you have your enterprise zone benefits, even some additional grants, and then the FTZ is the long-term savings of that. Eric, I don't know if you have any additional comments on that.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in terms of it should not interfere with it, but it's definitely complementary for sure. So when you're talking about operational for companies, and the other thing is as much as you have an enterprise zone that might be, I'm just gonna say in this area, quantum computing is the big one that's been out there, right, for the CHIPS Act, aerospace, any of these high tech areas. FTZ is fairly agnostic as far as industries. So while you can attract people within quantum computing, aerospace, whatever it is that you're trying to bring in, you can also have other companies that are in there as well, and the FTZ would still work. And then there might be other ways that, again, this is just operationally to reduce cost for a company, and either they do it themselves or you can work with a 3PL, 4PL partner to actually help provide FTZ services for those clients as they locate in there.
Good question.
Well, great. I think we're pretty much right there at time. I think I'm going to put one last link in the chat for folks. It is to provide feedback. So if you're interested in learning more about webinars consisting of our partners at Supply Chain Collective, or if you, first and foremost, we're going to ask you to rate the speakers today, and we're expecting all 5 stars. But if you would like to set up a consultation, you can easily do that through this same form. And then we'll be sure to connect you with Courtney or Eric or any others that are part of the Supply Chain Collective to gather more information about FTZs, about bond warehouses, about tariffs in general. So if there's any more questions, feel free to pop them in. We'll give you 1 minute to do so. And if we could, Courtney, could we let's unshare your screen here. Perfect. Great.
And then I was gonna say along those lines, definitely it's a lot of material to kind of absorb right now as well. FTZs tend to be that way. Same with bonded warehouses. If other questions come up as this kind of percolates too, don't hesitate to reach out through the Boulder Chamber. You either reach Courtney and myself direct, or I think we have all the connection information through the Boulder Chamber itself. Please reach out to Matt and the team. They will connect them with us. Happy to answer any questions that you might have in that sense.
Absolutely. Eric, Courtney, we really appreciate you being on the call today. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel, and we're going to be sending it out to everyone who attended today, plus the folks who registered and any others that are interested in viewing it. So we again thank you at Supply Chain Collective, and we'll sign off.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.